Howdy y'all. Over a century ago in 1922, the film Nosferatu was unleashed into the German populace. The film was based on Bram Stoker's masterpiece, Dracula, a fact that very nearly led to its demise. At this point in history, Dracula was not yet in the public domain, and the filmmakers did not get clearance to shoot an adaptation of the novel. So almost immediately after the film's release, they were greeted with a legal battle, spearheaded by Stoker's widow, Florence Ballacombe. After a tumultuous time in court, the judge ruled in Ballacombe's favor and sought out to have every single copy of Nosferatu destroyed, all of the celluloids being engulfed in flames so that no one would ever lay eyes on the film ever again. Thankfully, the courts were not successful in their mission, for you see, several copies of the film had already found their way overseas before the ruling was dealt. And it's from these surviving copies that we can still view Nosferatu in all of its glory today. The movie as it stands survives as a collection of the best shots and reels taken from all known prints. Now, that may not sound ideal, but it should be stated that 90% of all movies made before 1929 are now considered lost media. And Nosferatu survived even though it was specifically called out for destruction. The fact that we can watch it in any capacity today is nothing short of a miracle. And if you're like me, this was how you were introduced to the film. Nosferatu! I just barely remember being confused watching this episode as a kid. Who was this ghastly figure in the closing seconds of an otherwise seemingly normal episode of SpongeBob? It wouldn't be until years later that I learned the origins of said figure. And, not to be petty or anything, but his name isn't Nosferatu, it's Count Orlok. Or just straight up Count Dracula, depending on the print you're watching, but I digress. Getting back to the film itself, it's a classic for a very good reason. It tells the story of Dracula in a unique way that's still mostly faithful to the source material. A good portion of the characters are here and accounted for, all of them with their names changed in a vain attempt to skirt around copyright, which of course did not work, though the main reason for why this film is loved today is Count Orlok himself, played beautifully by Matt Shrex, a man who played the part of a vampire so well that many believe that he actually was a vampire, which just has to be the greatest praise that any actor could ever hope to receive. Yo, I bet that Tim Curry dude really was a clown. Count Orlok is memorable for several good reasons. First off, the makeup job on him is simply timeless. It truly looks like some horrid creature of the night that might very well suck your blood if given the chance. It's easy to see how this design was the basis for a lot of other monsters throughout the years. Though it's not just the makeup alone that makes him so iconic. The actor Max Shrex brings the vampire to life through one of the most famous film performances of all time. With his slow, calculated movements, you can tell that this is a wild animal that's always thinking of his next move. Most of the actors here are suitably over the top. Not much to say about that. That's just how silent film acting was. You kinda had to overreact to express your emotions without the luxury of sound. But it's because of this that Matt Shrek's performance stands out for being so much more subtle than others around him. It's almost certainly unintentional, but it helps in making him feel like an entirely different entity from everyone else in the movie. And here's a little fun fact for you. His death here, where he's killed by the rising sun, was the first ever depiction of sunlight killing a vampire. In Stoker's novel, the sun didn't kill Dracula, it just weakened his powers. You have Nosferatu to thank for establishing that into vampire lore. The scene itself is also great too. You have Elaine outsmarting the vampire by alluring him with her blood, allowing him to feast on her until the sun rises. It's a clever and realistic way to finish off the villain. I can easily buy the fact that Count Orlok would forget the time when he's acting on his most primal animalistic instincts. It also gives Ellen a vital role in the story by having her be the one that takes down the main threat. There really are so many great scenes here, like the Count goes to feast on Hunter and you have the iconic imagery of the vampire slowly yet deliberately going in for the feast. All the while, Ellen feels all of the pain pain and fear her husband is going through, but is unable to do anything about it. And later, when Hunter goes to search for the Count and finds him sleeping in a coffin deep within the castle's walls. I would go over every great scene in the movie, but then we'd just be here for hours. Though, if I may for a second, I'm gonna do something that very few of you are gonna like. I'm gonna critique a masterpiece. I know we all want to look at this film and call it a flawless work of art, and whatever blemishes it has are just a result of the fact that it is so old. Though, if we're being honest with ourselves, there are some things that didn't work back then and still don't work today. The first thing I want to bring up here is the character Knock. Now, he's the film's stand-in for Rainfield, but he kinda misses the point of Rainfield as the character. Rainfield is a brainwashed servant of Dracula who aids the Count throughout the novel. He's already under the Count's influence when we first meet him, locked away inside of Dr. Seward's mental asylum. It gives a sense of mystery to the character, allowing the reader to question how he originally fell under Dracula's influence. And while you still get that same sense of mystery with Knock, his role really doesn't go beyond that of just being a crazy man. Now, they added in the fact that he was Hunter's boss who told him to travel to Count Orlok in the first place, which is admittedly a nice touch, but that's the only time in the story where he interacts with the plot at all. While he's still shown to be Count Orlok's loyal servant, he doesn't help the vampire out in any way. Honestly, there's never any indication in the film that Orlok even knows who Knock is. And there's an entire scene where Knock breaks out of the mental asylum to get chased by some villagers. It really serves no purpose to the story, it's a complete narrative dead end. The plot just takes a back seat as we watch Knock run loose for a bit, only to then get captured off screen, ending back up right where we started. Actually, that's a pretty apt way to describe all of his scenes here. The plot pauses for a moment so we can cut to a crazy man in an asylum who's just barely connected to the rest of the story. And on the topic of characters, another one I want to bring up is Ellen Hunter, the film's version of Mina Harker. During the film, she has psychic visions of what the Count is doing to her husband in his castle. At least, I guess that's what's supposed to be happening here. It's never really explained what exactly is going on. Is she a clairvoyant? Is the Count making her witness these things to mess with her? Your guess is as good as mine. Yes, I know Mina in the novel also had visions of Dracula, but that was after he made her drink his blood. It's because of that connection that she had visions of the Count's whereabouts later in the story. Here though, she's just able to see or feel what is happening to her husband, even though she hasn't even met the Count at this point in the movie. Don't get me wrong, this is still a great scene, having Ellen helplessly watch as her husband is being attacked. This is the meaning of terror right here. But it would have been even better if it was properly explained what was happening. And the last thing I want to bring up here is how the story is being told in the first place. The film plays out through the narrative device of a history book written about the tragedy that Count Orlok brought to Germany. It's told through a first-person perspective, but never is it made clear who that person is. The narrator describes things in a way as if they were an active member in the story, even going as far as to describe other characters interacting with them at points. But every active member of the story is at one point or another described in the third person, so it can't be any of them writing the events down. So either it's some off-screen party acting as a narrator, or the narrator is flipping back between first and third person. Either way, it's confusing. Now, to be fair, that's definitely more of a minor complaint. Nosferatu must have been one of the first films ever to attempt a narrative device like this, so some growing pains are to be expected. Also, it should be remembered that I'm watching the translated English title cards for the film. For all I know, the original German cards specified who was supposed to be telling the story, so definitely take that critique with a grain of salt. Actually, take all of the things I said about this film with a grain of salt. This movie is a masterpiece. It has effortlessly stood the test of time. It's amazing that a silent movie can so easily engross you in its plot. You honestly forget that you're watching a silent picture as become become so invested in the characters and setting. It being silent is not a hindrance by any means. If anything, it aids the movie in making it feel more off-putting. Don't get me wrong, Nosferatu isn't the only good silent movie out there by any means, but it easily stands out as one of the best. I can't recommend this film enough. It's an hour and 20 minutes of some really solid silent horror. Speaking purely in terms of atmosphere, it's unrivaled by any other Dracula adaptation out there. And you literally have no reason not to watch it. It's in the public domain, just look it up on YouTube. There are several high quality uploads of it on this website alone. Yeah, you can watch this movie for free, no problem. I just bought the Blu-ray cause I have a problem. So sit back, relax, and sink your teeth into this masterpiece. And be sure to give it a watch before the new Nosferatu releases this Christmas. A remake that may or may not have been the entire reason I made this video in the first place. But before you get on to me for being a sellout, let me just say one last thing. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and until next time, goodbye y'all.